We all do the countdowns, we make the resolutions, but the story behind this global party is way more complex and honestly kind of political than you'd ever guess. So let's get into it. It's a great question, right? It feels so random. It's cold, it's dark. Why right then? Why that exact moment? Well, the answer has nothing to do with the seasons or the stars or some ancient farming cycle. Nope. It all comes down to politics. Okay, let's peel back the first layer of this story. The date, January 1st, wasn't picked for some big, meaningful celestial or religious reason. It was really just a practical, almost boring administrative decision made over 2,000 years ago.
Originally, the Roman New Year kicked off in March, which, totally makes sense, right? Spring, new life, new beginnings. But then, in 1530 BC, they moved it to January 1st. So why the change? Well, it was for a surprisingly boring reason. It was purely to line up with when new government officials, the consuls, started their jobs. That's it.
So, the Romans had a name for it, of course, the Calendae Januarii. And it quickly became a time for family get-togethers and parties, which honestly doesn't sound all that different from what we do today. So here's the really important thing to remember. Our New Year's celebration begins as a Roman, secular, and political tradition. But what about that connection to religion? Okay, so this is where the story gets a little messy, because a lot of us just assume there's this direct line between the start of our modern year and, the birth of Jesus. But if you look at the history, they were two totally separate holidays. But you gotta hand it to the early Christian church. They were super strategic. To make it easier to convert pagans, they cleverly placed the celebration of Jesus' birth in late December. Why? Because it lined up perfectly with wildly popular Roman festivals like Saturnalia, a whole week of feasting, partying, and giving gifts. They basically just piggybacked on a party that was already happening. Smart, right? And this quote just nails it, doesn't it? Christmas and New Year's had completely different origins. Christmas was designed to sync up with a pagan festival. New Year's was all about the Roman government calendar. They were like neighbors on the calendar, but they definitely weren't related. And for centuries after that, things were just a total mess. Different places celebrated the new year on different days. Some used Christmas, some even used Easter. It really wasn't until the Gregorian calendar came along in 1582 that January 1st got locked back in as the official start of the year for most of the Western world. Okay, so that's the date, but what about the stuff we actually do? The ball drop, that weird baby New Year. What's the deal with them? Where did they come from? All right, baby New Year, this one's actually a pretty cool bit of symbolism. It's all about the cycle of life and that idea of a totally fresh start. This little baby is born right at the start of the year, grows into an old man by the end, and then hands things off to the next baby. It's literally time itself personified. Okay, so we've got our symbol for renewal, but how do we mark that exact moment, that split second when the year flips over? Why a giant sparkly ball falling from a pole? Well, the answer is super practical and has absolutely nothing to do with a party. Believe it or not, that famous ball drop is actually a leftover from 19th century sailing. Yeah, you heard that right. Time balls used to be dropped from observatories, usually at high noon, so sailors out at sea could see them and set their ship clocks, their chronometers, accurately. It wasn't a perfect system. Bad weather could mess it up. And get this. By the time the very first ball dropped in Times Square in 1907, the whole technology was already obsolete. But hey, it looked cool, so it stuck around as a great show. So, when you think about it, our January's 1st celebration is this wild mix of Roman paperwork and old-school naval tech. But of course, it's just one way of doing things. It's worth taking a step back for a second. All around the world, you see cultures tying their new year to what's happening in nature. Rosh Hashanah in the fall is a time for serious reflection. Nowruz is all about celebrating the spring equinox. In New Zealand, Matariki is tied to the rise of a star cluster. It just goes to show you that this human need for a fresh start can be tied to pretty much anything, the seasons, the moon, or the stars. Okay, so we've unpacked all the history. But what does New Year's actually do for us now, like today? Beyond just an excuse for a party, it has some really big social and economic effects. And I have to share this one with you because it's my favorite quirky economic fact. In Sweden, New Year's Day is the single biggest day of the entire year for pizza sales. It's such a huge deal that people there basically call it National Pizza Day. How great is that? On the one hand, New Year's is this huge social glue, right? It brings us together for parties, family dinners, massive events like college football games. But there's definitely a flip side. All that pressure to have the perfect celebration can also make people feel super isolated if their night doesn't look like the one on TV. So when you pull it all together, the big takeaway is that our New Year's traditions, they're not some ancient, sacred thing. They're this fascinating, kind of random collection of Roman politics, clever Christian marketing, and even outdated sailing technology. It really makes you wonder, what will the celebration look like in another 200 years? And what story will they think is the real one?